Welcome to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast. Today we are talking to Jennifer Kabbany of the College Fix, thecollegefix.com, and we're talking about Fauxcahontas, and we're not even necessarily talking about Elizabeth Warren. Jennifer, is there more than one Fauxcahontas that we should be talking about today?
There's so many that they have now started calling them Pretendians. It's actually a term that has to have been developed because so many white women and men are wrongly or falsely claiming Native American heritage in order to get ahead in America.
You know, it's interesting because, I've known people who have claimed to be Cherokee, and then you talk to Native American activists, and they will say almost everybody who claims to be Cherokee really isn't, but, and it's, tribal membership is really a technical and legal issue. And it's no easy mess to sort out, as we found out with Elizabeth Warren, who promoted her own educational career by claiming Native American heritage based on family folklore, and at one point, high cheekbones. And then she took a DNA test, which really irritated tribal activists, because they will tell you can't. It's not determined by DNA; it's determined by genealogy and firm genealogy and the tribe itself, which is fair. I mean, so let's start there. I mean, how do you make these claims? It's one thing to make a claim among friends. Oh, I've got some Cherokee Indian in me. I was watching Zombieland Double Tap, which is just a hilarious movie, and Woody Harrelson and his character in there claims to have Blackfoot heritage, and there's some funny scenes with that. But I mean, how do you go about doing this in academia without being able to establish tribal membership? Because I mean, that to me is sort of a basic, accountability checkpoint, right? Do you have tribal membership? No. Well, then you can't claim this. And yet apparently they don't have that type of check.
Right. Well, with regard to, we did the article, the Fauxcahontas trend, white women pretending to be Native American. We dug into half a dozen examples in the last several years of women who actually made a career out of claiming to be Native American. And like you said, they use folklore, stories they heard from their parents or grandparents, and they create this vast narrative of, their family's history and the struggles and whatnot. Meanwhile, they're getting book deals, they're getting tenure, they're celebrated, feted, they give speeches, they're beloved. This one that we just reported on recently, her book was like Book of the Month Club. So it really benefits them to claim this heritage, which flies in the face of the notion and narrative of white privilege, really, because it's a one-way ticket straight to the top for a lot of these female scholars in academia. And yeah, it's based pretty much on folklore. Although I will say, with the tribal enrollments, a lot of tribes, unfortunately, over the last 2 decades have been disenrolling legitimate Native Americans for financial gain, because if you're on tribal enrollment, you get a part of the casino profits. So over the years, unfortunately, a lot of tribes have maliciously disenrolled their own people just for profit, which I think is horrible. But I wanted to throw that out there as a small caveat.
No, and I'm glad you did, because a friend of mine actually has gone through that. He goes by the handle Original Pechanga, and he's been fighting the Pechanga tribe for years, I think decades, to get his tribal status restored. And it's a money play. It's
heartbreaking, because it's like, why would you do that to your own people? I mean, I'm very familiar with the Pechanga tribe, and the folks that are claiming that should be on the enrollment list can easily trace their parents or grandparents, have documents, proof, birth certificates, paperwork. So it's a really sad state of affairs in the Native American communities right now.
It is, and it's actually a big fight with the Department of Interior, which is the federal bureau that manages these things. Department of Indian Affairs is part of our Bureau of Bureau of Indian Affairs is under the Department of the Interior, I believe, and which is actually being headed up at the moment by the first Native American to head up the Department of the Interior, Deb Haaland. And so, I mean, so you got really two different things going on here about identity. And it's really, about incentives. I mean, it's not even about
Yeah.
identity anymore. It's about incentives. And look, I mean, I'm not going to argue that, you know, white people in this country have had privilege in the past. That's certainly the case. But when you reset the incentives the way that the incentives have been reset, for good or bad, you're going to get really bizarre behavior based on those incentives. And part of this is tribal authorities disenrolling actual Native Americans. And the other part of that incentive structure, two different incentive structures, is people claiming membership in order to gain economic incentives. And you can make the argument that Elizabeth Warren did that. She claims that that wasn't the case, but she was promoted as, I believe it was Harvard Law's first Native American woman on, and so there was a value that was attached to that. There's incentives that are attached to that.
Yeah, and not just Native American. We've covered scholars who have pretended to be Black and pretended to be Latino to do much the same thing, to gain tenure, book deals, to be celebrated as a victimhood class. They get they're invited to give guest lectures. They're beloved. So there's an incentive on all stripes for this kind of behavior.
How big of a problem is this in academia? I know the college. I mean, certainly we could look at we can look at the tribal system. That's not really that's not really part of College Fix's focus. Your focus is in academia. How big of a problem is this in academia? Is it getting worse or is it getting better?
Well, it seems like now there's this effort to expose the people who've already done it. So they're already embedded in the structures. And now there's groups like ancestrystealing.com who are going around proving that a lot of people who've been claiming this heritage, in fact, have very flimsy claims, if not outright lying. So I would say it's a small percentage, but you're still like, who does this, right? Like, who creates this whole narrative around their lives? It seems like to live a lie, again, for financial incentive. They get promoted, they get tenure, they get book deals, they get celebrated. So I suppose there's a reason to do it, as you mentioned, an incentive. But we had the Rachel Dolezal, remember her a couple years ago?
I was just about to bring her up.
Yeah, and she had she put on fake tanner, curled her hair, and she was a professor. And again, we've had a couple of Latino professors do that we've covered at the College Fix. So I think more and more people will do it because they're like, why not? It's the only way to get ahead in academia, or it's a surefire way to get ahead, at least.
At the same time, you mentioned this, right? You have this effort in academia to sort of undermine the idea of authentic identity anyway, right? I mean, race is a social construct, something you mentioned specifically, but not just race, also biological sex is becoming a social construct, or is a social construct, especially among academics, where you have to have dozens of different listings for gender, and all sorts of different. You have to remember all sorts of different personal pronouns, else you get you get challenged in academic. I'm trying to think of the right word for it, but basically,
well, I mean, you're exactly right. Like there's that odd irony, because we quoted Heather McDonald in our article about the Fauxcahontas problem, and she pointed out that the academic left simultaneously insists that race is a social construct with no biological reality. Therefore, she points out, if race is in fact simply an artificial category, why not choose one's own race? The left has never answered the question why we all can't be Black. She's kind of calling them out on their hypocrisy, but she's saying, okay, if there's no genetic reality of race, what's wrong with these people pretending to be Native Americans? If they feel like that, if they identify like that, who are you to say they can't do that? Who are you to say they're not really? So there's a bit of leftist hypocrisy going on in this case.
Well, age even is being argued as a social construct, right? And you see this a lot. Sorry to say that you see this a lot when people are arguing that ages of consent are nothing more than a social construct, and it really should just be left to the individual to determine whether or not that somebody's ready for sexual activity. And some of the people who are arguing that are pretty creepy.
Yeah,
for good reason. We're very concerned about that. But Rachel Dolezal, or I think it's Dolezal was the way she pronounced it. I forget what it was, but that goes back 8 years, just almost 8 years ago. And that was really before the sex as a social construct really started gaining steam. And I have to ask you this: if Rachel Dolezal showed up at a university today and declared that she that her identity was Black, regardless of what her background was, that might still be a little too hot button for universities to allow without a check. But if she showed up and said with the maybe she put straightener in her hair and used a dark hair dye and used the same tanning technique that she was using before, and said, "Oh no, I'm Native American. I identify as Native American." Do you think that it would have caused anywhere near the amount of notoriety and controversy? Bearing in mind, of course, Jennifer, that she was also running the local chapter of the NAACP.
Indeed, she was. Yeah, she really made a career out of it. I mean, she was a trailblazer. It's hard to say because, again, the left is speaking out of both sides of your mouth. So you can choose your sex, you can choose your gender. Well, why can't you choose your race? Again, they're being hypocrites on this matter. So we're seeing this one trend apparently is you still can't choose your own race, according to the left, but you can choose everything else, including from 63 different gender preferences and a variety of other things while you're at it.
So I'm just going to read you just because I want to sort of nail this with the Rachel Dolezal example. 8 years ago, almost 8 years ago, she was on the Today Show, and just to give you an idea of how far back this was, Matt Lauer was still the host.
Yeah.
And he's interviewing her, and he says, "Are you an African American woman?" And her response to this was, "I identify as Black." He then shows her a picture of her at 16, with blonde hair, right? And and then he asks her, is this girl African American? And she says, in that picture during that time, no. But she identifies as Black. And here's I think the issue when it comes to Native Americans, why the tribes, I think, are rightly concerned about this, is that there really isn't any great way to determine this in terms of Native American ancestry.
Yeah.
You can determine African American ancestry usually just by simple genealogy. It's not so simple with Native Americans. And that's the reason why the Native American tribes have really held on to that, the tribal identification enrollment process.
Right.
But I think it speaks to the incentives for the universities as well. This is why I want to get back to incentives on the Fauxcahontas problem, the Pretendian problem, as you put it, Jennifer Kabbany, is that it's not just, these people aren't claiming this just on the basis of their own personal incentives for doing so, although that's obviously a very large part of it. The universities are getting something out of this. The incentives are set up for the universities in this system as well. And maybe we can explore that a little bit. What are the incentives for the universities to show that they've got more Native American faculty than is actually the case?
Well, the incentive is self-righteousness. Like, look at us. We are, making sure that we fight white privilege, that we fight against the status quo, and we raise up these victims and we celebrate them and we honor them and we respect them. So we're doing the right thing, pat ourselves on the back. They're bean counters, they're quota fillers. That's
the problem. And this is one of the things that obviously the Supreme Court's going to be looking at in the cases this year. They're going to be looking at affirmative action. And I think everybody sort of expects the Supreme Court to say, we've had enough, because John Roberts warned about this. I think it was like 15, 17 years ago, that this sort of official license to violate the 14th Amendment to right previous wrongs had a limit to it, and that we were going to be approaching it fairly soon. I think that's going to be the case here. Do you think that that's going to have an impact then on the pretendian impulse, I guess you can call it, or fad? Or are the righteousness incentives just simply too strong and people are going to continue doing this?
I've always said that even if the Supreme Court, outlaws affirmative action, they will find a way, universities will find a way to continue the practice, either through some measure of holistic admissions, is what they call it, holistic admissions, or some other loophole or some other strategy. This is not going to end with the Supreme Court. I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer, because it does look like the Supreme Court is going to rule against it, but these universities will find a way to continue to manipulate the student demographics as they see fit.
Well, and again, we're talking with the Supreme Court, we're talking about the student demographics, but what we're talking about here is actually the faculty demographics, which I think will even be tougher to work out in terms of the incentive structure, because I mean, I'm not necessarily sure how broad a Supreme Court decision is going to be. Supreme Courts tend to be narrow enough to get the point across, but tend to be a little reluctant to go any broader than that. And I think whatever decision's coming out here is going to really be focused on admissions only. But
yeah, and then, but I mean, in terms of who they hire, that's their purview. That's their direct. They have the choice. Right. Unless there is a lawsuit in Texas right now that was filed by a white finance professor against a Texas university because of the job description made it sound like they would only consider people of color. So we don't know how far that lawsuit's going to go, because it's hard to prove damages if you're just an applicant to a job.
Yep.
So it's going to have to tread new ground. But right now, universities have the autonomy and the authority to hire who they want.
Well, and Heather McDonald did say being of a favored race or ethnicity confers an enormous advantage in the college admissions racket, and that certainly applies to the faculty as well, as you guys are covering. Fauxcahontas white female scholars keep pretending to be Native American. That's at thecollegefix.com. And Jennifer Kabbany has been our guest on the podcast. Jennifer, where else can people find you?
So yeah, we are on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, all the socials. And we also have a newsletter that you could sign up at thecollegefix.com. And I only email it twice a week. I don't destroy your inbox with, 3 times a day, I promise. It's just twice a week of our highlights. So be sure to sign up for that and keep up with us. It's never a dull moment at the campus, at the College Fix. We're always covering the campus craziness, and there's no end in sight.
There is absolutely no end in sight to that at all. Jennifer Kabbany, thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, anytime.
Now that the political infighting is over and the sausage is being made in the House, it's time for Republicans to unite with one cause and fight back against Joe Biden and his radical administration. The GOP has promised to investigate Biden family corruption, the border, big tech censorship collusion, the origins of COVID, the FBI, and intel agencies' attacks on the American people, and more. And it's time to hold them to those promises. Here at Hot Air, we won't let up on holding them accountable. We unapologetically fight back against the radical left and squishy rhinos in Congress who fail the people. We bring you the truth and go to war against Biden's woke communist agenda. But we need your help. By becoming a VIP for hotair.com, you can help us in this battle for our country. Just look at the House Democrats leader Hakeem Jeffries. He's another divisive radical leftist, and his communist Sesame Street speech proves it. If Republicans don't halt the Biden agenda and conservative media fails to hold them accountable, it could mean the end of our great country. Join us in the fight. Become a Hot Air VIP member or a VIP Gold member today and use the promo code SAVEAMERICA to receive a 40% discount on your membership. Stand with us and fight to save America. We will never give up. And thank you very much.